I've done all the rest so far. And so basically, I'm dealing with the Joshua generation.
Yeah.
And I mentioned back to you in, I hope this is okay to start now. I mentioned back to you in, I think it was in January, or I'm trying to remember when. I think it was in January when I first had the revelation from the Lord, and I briefly mentioned it to you because most of the time I just was listening to you and I didn't want to, step in. But I think it's important for me now because I want to get the correspondence of the two, or if I have my timeline off a little bit. In January, I was kind of feeling somewhat, at times when you're not seeing like you see, you're blessed now that you've moved along so far that you get to really see in the Spirit the things that is revealed to you in the Word. And I'm still going mostly just by faith. And so I was just, in my heart asking the Lord, am I all wet here? Is this, because I know what you put in my heart. I know what's burning inside, but it's like I need something here. And so I've for a long time I've had a great respect and honor, almost a fascination with Enoch. And so the Lord, I felt that that Enoch wasn't just a anomaly in the Bible, but that he was some kind of representation for us, with him being the seventh from Adam, and which is declared really in the Word that he is a special type of shadow that we're to look for, right?
Yeah.
So I was asking the Lord, am I right about the timeline and everything we're in, or what's going on? And I felt him tell me to go back and look at Enoch's age. Yeah. And so I went back and I looked at Enoch's age, and I knew kind of where he was going because I'd seen this before in the Word that a lot of people say he walked with the Lord his whole life. He didn't. His declaration of walking with the Lord is after a certain event, and that's the birth of Methuselah. Mm. So I looked at it, and I knew I was going to see a difference, and he had me focus on the 65 years that he didn't walk with the Lord.
Yeah.
And so I said, okay, I know that. And he said, then he told me this, Mike, and it threw me off because I've never been an Israel focusing type of guy or anything like that, but he said, now I want you to take 65 and add it to 1948. So I got my calculator out and I added it. It was 2013. My eyes just kind of blew open, because that was basically the start of, the Mayans, and everything said as far as they knew, an age was ending in December of 2012. So I go, okay, so maybe there is more to this 1948. So I started studying Israel, 1948, because something significant must have happened other than, just the testimonies I heard. Well, do you know that Israel became a nation on the day of Pentecost? 1948. And it happened in one day. They made a plea to the United Kingdom, and they had a special session, and they released them on a late Friday night. So Saturday, which would have been 6 p.m. or whenever their sundown was, they became a nation on Pentecost. Now, I thought that was very interesting. So I started doing some more studying, and I said, okay, so what about this Enoch guy? He was alive when Adam was alive. His great-great-grandfather, great-great-great-great-grandfather, he could have communicated to him about, what it was like before the fall. And so I started looking at these timelines.
Oh dear. Okay, yep.
I'm back, sorry.
Go for it.
I must be on like a weak Wi-Fi or something. He was born in 1948 from Adam. So I guess what I'm trying to say is what was coming and burning in my heart, that we are an Enoch generation.
Yeah.
And so I'm reading all your stuff, and I'm really seeing that we are also a Joshua generation. Yeah. So how do the two coincide in your heart? Or do they?
Oh, absolutely they do, yeah. I mean...
Hi, George.
I think a lot of the sort of the dates and the things that God does, I believe he can just get our attention by using anything in the Word, anything that he likes to engage us. And so, you know, when we see things like that, you know, I think it's just an indication that God tunes into our wavelength, and it's basically, this is something that's going to get your attention. This is going to open up some revelation for you. I'm going to use this as the sign that you've been looking for, that you're on the right track. So I think a lot of things God does that. Sometimes he uses numbers. People see the same number on a clock. It's just it gets people's attention. So I think in terms of what you've experienced, you know, you were seeking, and God gave you some insight into something that used numerology that couldn't have been anything other than God. You know, the reality is that only God could give you those numbers, and they add up to the things that reveal the things that you were looking for.
Right.
So, you know, now I think the Joshua generation, for me, is a generation who are going to be mentors for the generation that is coming. And I'm not talking about an age generation, but a generation of believers that's going to be birthed as I would say a harvesting generation. Those who are going to be supernatural harvesters, who are going to live a supernatural lifestyle. They're going to demonstrate heaven on earth. But that generation needs mentors, and the mentors are those who have gone before and seen the promises, experienced the promises, and then can begin to lead people into living those promises. So the Joshua generation is a generation that has been through the wilderness, has seen what it's been like before 2013, and have lived in that time where restoration has taken place of various ministries, healing ministry, prophetic ministry, apostolic ministry, but actually all of them came to an end at the end of 2012. And I believe it's significant. I know Ian Clayton teaches it. He's basically saying that in the end of 2012, the apostolic order ended and a new order began, the Order of Melchizedek. Now, I believe that is synonymous with the Joshua generation. That's an order who has lived in the old order, but has come out of that into something new to inherit the promises of a new land. So I think 2013 was, or at the end of 2012, was hey, there is a Jordan to be crossed. And for those who were at that point of engagement, we began to cross over into something new and engage in something new. So how does that relate to the Enoch generation? It's those who walk with God in the realms of the Spirit, which is what Enoch did. And I think you can glean some good information looking at Enoch's life in the Word of God, but when you read the book of Enoch, it opens up a whole different dimension. And when you actually look at what it says in Jude and other places, you know, Enoch prophesied about what was coming, about that time.
Our day.
Yeah, our day. He prophesied. He saw into our day and he prophesied it. And I think it's significant that Enoch's life, again, he walked without God for a period of his life. Then he began to walk with God, and then he walked with God in so much intimacy that he walked in the realms of the Spirit. Now, I met Enoch a few times. Enoch has assigned me some quests in heaven. I found quite an interesting character. He's assigned me some quests. He's directed me in some things. He told me to read his book. So, you know, and so I thought, well, actually, I better read it. You know, and so I began to look at some of the inferences about what it was like before the flood. You know, how things went wrong. You know, and that type of thing, and it engaged, you know, me in an understanding of what it is to walk in such a dimension that we will not need to see death, if you like, because that's what Enoch did. He walked with God in such a dimension that he never saw death, but he was walking in those realms for way longer than when he went into those realms. It wasn't like he was walking on the earth and then God took him into heaven. He was walking on the earth and walking into the realms of heaven at the same time. He was the forerunner of living in dual realms. So he was engaging the realms of heaven. Now I asked him, well, what happened to you when you didn't come back? You know, and he basically told me that he looked into the eyes of God and looked into eternity and never came back. Which is when I went into the dark cloud and looked into the face of God, I was not going to look into his eyes. It was like, I'm not looking into your eyes. I want to come back. You know, I've got outstanding work. You know, so I think they are synonymous, but they describe, one describes a pattern of life, the other describes, you know, a way, and they are synonymous. You know, if you think of how did Joshua get the revelation he did, well, he spent time lingering in the tent of meeting after Moses left. He wasn't content with a little bit of revelation or just basking in the glory that Moses had. He stayed. He developed a different spirit. He developed a way of engaging God, which was more intimate, you know. And I think, for me, all these three, and you get, you know, you hear messages preached on it. Some people get this whole thing of Enoch and what is the Enoch generation and what does it mean. You know, others people talk about Joshua generation. Ian is very much talking about the Order of Melchizedek. To me, they're all talking about the same. That God is raising up a generation of people who will cross into their inheritance and will begin to teach the next generation to walk like Enoch, to walk in accordance with the four faces of God, to be engaging God, to be without genealogy, which I think that's the thing. Enoch stepped into eternity. It talks about Melchizedek of having no genealogy, and this order, if we're going to enter into the fullness, then we must be transfigured into the image of God and into his glory and begin to radiate a different dimension of light than we've been doing up till now. You know, Jesus came as the light of the world, and people walked with him. He told us to be the light of the world. You know, and then we have to walk in the light, and then we need to become light. You know, and that, I think that process of transformation is a key element to this, in that we can be transformed into the image of God by the DNA of God, and in various ways, obviously through communion, through engaging the dance floor, through engaging in some places in the realms of heaven, the firestones and different things, where we absorb light, where we receive revelation of light, where we get transformed genetically, so that we have nothing that comes from that old order, because that was the problem before the flood. Genetically, Noah was the only one who was left pure. Everyone else was mixed. And, you know, if we're going to walk like Enoch, who was pure, and if we're going to walk in the order of Melchizedek, who had no genealogy, then we need to get the same. And I think transformation at that level is not just possible, it's actually vital. And I believe that that's why the revelation of communion and not needing to die, again, lines up with Enoch. You know, it lines up with Enoch didn't need to die. You know, I think we just go to the fulfillment of what Enoch was indicating with his life, and as a testimony that we can not only not need to die, but we can walk in heaven and on earth like him and engage in the fullness of it. So, you know, I certainly believe that we are at a crucial point. I think last year was a significant time for many people, and the old ways, you know, are falling away. You know, do the things just stop? Well, I think there's an end, and then there's a beginning, and you know, we've entered into a new beginning. There are a whole host of the church who have no idea what we're talking about. So has God finished with them? No, he just gives them an opportunity to respond right up to the point where they can no longer respond. And I think, you know, we have to become those people who genuinely model a new kingdom lifestyle, which is engaging you in a new level of revelatory engagement with God both here and in heaven. And we're on a journey of discovering what that is, and we're learning how to engage it, and it opens up a whole realm of possibilities of things, things that we just did not dream possible once you begin to engage in that realm of the spirit. I mean, I've probably, in the last 12 months, in terms of acceleration in my own life, in terms of revelation and understanding, probably more than ever put everything else together, and I've learned in my life, I learned more in the last 12 months by engaging and going deeper with God experientially. And the previous 3 years from that, I learned more than the whole of my life. It's just like it is increasing, and I think that is why we're at this point of we get to write history. And I think that's the key. If we are able to look into God's purposes and plans in eternity, like Enoch was, and then we can bring them into our day and manifest them from what was into what is, then we begin to write what will be. Someone asked me earlier, have you engaged the timeline and looked into the future? And I basically had to say to him, no, because I've had no desire to do so, because I don't believe the future has been written yet. I think you can look into possible futures, but actually it is not written. So when we look into what God has purposed in eternity, and we begin to bring that into today, it will change what tomorrow will be to align with it. And so, is in eternity, I know Ian Clayton says he's been to 2057, and he's seen that we're still here in 2057, which seemingly is another generation, which certainly lines up with what I feel God has shown me towards the future. But it's more like I've received prophetic revelation of something rather than going and looking into it, because I've not felt my spirit call me to do that. I've gone into the past numerous times, but not felt that I wanted to go into the future, because I want to be part of making that future by living it out now and beginning to bring the future out of our revelation of God's purposes in eternity. So yeah, I mean, I really resonate with each of those terms in different ways, and the one that resonates most is I guess the Joshua generation, because that is what I received as revelation for my desire of my life, I guess, to raise up, help be part of that generation and help raise it up and equip it. But you get other aspects by looking into the other names that will enable you to get a fuller picture. I think Enoch gives you more revelatory understanding. The Order of Melchizedek adds to it, and there are illustrations that God uses in each to just bring us a fullness to it. I don't know if that sort of makes sense. But
I would say that the Joshua generation and the 40 characteristics, as I'm studying them out and reading along with you and pondering them on my heart, because I knew them all. I mean, I've read it so many times.
Yeah.
But the practical application now for actually using those principles that they walked in to move into the Promised Land are so applicable to us, because it was a supernatural act, and that's what we have to move from, is the natural mindsets, the works mindsets, or our own strength mindsets, to we're going to go alongside, and God's going to allow us to supernaturally be empowered to take this Promised Land.
Yeah, definitely. And then to go beyond that, from establishing a territory and using that territory as the beachhead to effectively invade the rest of the world, and to fulfill the dominion mandate to bring God's kingdom on earth as it is in heaven, and to actually do what Adam and Eve would have done is to actually bring earth into heavenly alignment, so that we live under the laws of heaven, we live under the government of heaven, we manage the government of heaven, we administer the government of heaven on earth, being in heaven in our spirits, but living here connected just like Jesus was. And I see the cities of refuge, whatever you call them, resource centers. I just see that there will be nothing like that we've ever experienced before. You know, they will be living like it was to Adam and Eve were living, walking with God in the garden and in God's garden, and bringing that into our day, so that we will be like the mountain of the house of the Lord, raised up to be an example of what heaven is like on earth, so that people will stream to it. You know, particularly when they need engagement with a miracle or a different way of living, but compared to what is going to be. And I think, you know, the shaking of things that we just get little rumbles of are going to be extreme, so that people are going to realize everything that they put their trust in no longer works. So they're looking for a solution. They need to find it in a generation that are living it supernaturally, demonstrating what it is to manifest the kingdom on earth that is in heaven. And to do that, we need to be in heaven and engage it. And I think that's where, you know, I think looking at the characteristics of the Joshua generation, you can look at them all as, well, yeah, they're good characteristics to have as a Christian life and walk in the Christian life. But you got to look into it and see that the dimension of the spiritual and the dimension of heaven that's involved in being able to manifest that kingdom on the earth is just so different from what, you know, I would have seen a few years ago. And you know, and it's opened my heart and my desire to pursue and look into, you know, what was God's purpose? What was his intention? What was his desire in eternity for me? What was his desire for the sphere of government that I'm involved with? What did it look like from that eternal perspective, so I can actually have something to begin to administer, to call into being, to begin to create around me in my own life, and then outwardly from there. And that's, you know, led me to engage in heavenly encounters and experiences of things that my mind is still not yet caught up with. You know, I know my spirit contains revelatory knowledge and light, if you like, encoded in me, that my own mind is only just beginning to catch up with some of it. You know, and I think that's, hey, pretty awesome. You know, that you can receive revelation in our spirit that then begins to program our lives and our mind, rather than the other way around. And we've been so long programmed by the world and our genealogy that now we're going to be reprogrammed, you know, by the renewing of our minds, not conformed to any of those things, but transformed, transfigured, metamorphosed into a different being, if you like. You know, and I think that's what we'll be. We will be unrecognizable from what we receive from our natural genealogy when we step into manifesting the fullness of the four faces of God on the earth. That we get to manifest those dimensions of God through our lives, which would be, you know, pretty exciting stuff, really. But you know, it does have practical outworkings. I think it's not just all spiritual. You know, it has to change things. It has to be that we begin to have those transforming power, to be creative in what we do, and to do everything that Jesus did and greater things than he did. You know, so my desire of my heart is to pursue it. You know, and I'm pursuing it as with everything I've got, really. But it's great to have a whole load of people who are along for the journey. And you know, for a long time I felt like I was on my own. You know, and talking to some people, and it was just like, oh, what are you on about, so it's great to have people who are talking and relating, and we can share stuff and talk about things which can help and encourage us along the way. Yeah.
I have a question about heaven, but if someone else has questions, let them go ahead.
Okay.
No one else. Okay, so I was listening, and my wife was sitting by me, and we were, and she didn't hear it, but you were basically communicating in one of your sessions about the different levels and the timeline. It was from a sketch that Ian did. I guess you also put it in there, and it's circular in nature, where it shows the earth and then the heavens of earth, and then it goes in all the way into like the throne room of God. But then you made a comment, and I was excited about it, but my wife took serious issue with it because it messed with her whole past teaching. And it was this: you said, well, I got to heaven and I saw, you might know what I'm already going, I saw my grandkids who were miscarried.
Yeah.
And when you and with that we can understand, because obviously they're going to be in heaven. But then you talked about how they needed to have you as a representative for them, go to the courts and help them with the problem with I think it was abandonment. And she looked at me and says, I can't, I'm having problems with that, because we think heaven as a place of full completion. We, no more issues and stuff, and that just directly challenges this false impression that I believe we've received, that heaven is all of a sudden there's nothing else to be done once you're there. You're you see him and you're like him. And so all your pain, your sorrow wipes away every tear. It's all done once you get there. And so, could you speak to that a little bit?
Yeah. There's so many things that challenge our previous understanding of things. I'm continually challenged, and my mindsets are continually challenged, and it's a good thing. It's like if revelation's not progressive, then it means I know everything that I'm going to know, and like God is infinite, so I cannot possibly know everything I'm going to know. And so when I experienced those things, it challenged me. It challenged my understanding. But the realm of the kingdom of God in heaven, for instance, has spiritual beings which are not good. It's a domain of light and darkness, because we have not occupied our mountains and brought light and taken authority in that place, and so there are still works of the enemy there. Well, that throws people. Wasn't Satan cast out of heaven? He was, and so were the demonic beings, but there are so many different dimensions to heaven. The cherubim and the fiery sword guard the pathway to the tree of life to enter into eternity, so there is a dimension that they cannot cross. But they are occupying the atmosphere of the earth, and they are also occupying realms in the dimension of the kingdom of God, which is a heavenly realm. So not everything is perfected, because we have not yet been perfected. We're the ones that God's given dominion in those realms to perfect. And if we're not perfected, then they aren't perfected.
Hebrews 11, apart from us, they're not complete.
Yeah. And so we have to realize that we are part of the process. And I think it's amazing to think that, God is complete in himself. And, you have, the Trinity, if you like, and you have 3 times 3 times 3 in terms of the skins of God and the nature of the stones and all that sort of stuff. That 9, it represents that completion, and it represents the 9 firestones, and it represents the 9 stones on Satan's body, which was to shine out the revelation of God's purpose for mankind, to bring government. And then you see the high priest has the 12 stones, and it's like God has included us in fulfilling government. I just think that's just so amazing. Hence, there's not three faces of God; there are four. And He's called us to be part of that, and I just feel, a lot of that, those are perceptions of things. So when I engaged in those things, it's like, you can access the timeline, and you can go back, and you can be used to affect things in the past. You can't change the past, but you can go back and be part of the past, because God can use us to go back and answer people's prayers in the past. And I've had a number of occasions with people recently who have done that. And so when I was engaging my grandchildren, it's like I was being used to deal with what had happened at their miscarriage. That was it. It wasn't like I was dealing with it in the now. I was dealing with it in the as it happened, so that it no longer affects them. So it's a way of looking at it, which means we can be involved in transformation in a whole different dimension and way. And so that also then overwhelmed into my own personal life. I was able then to share that with my daughter, and as then she then took that and then did something about it, in that she then actually gave them names, because they had no earthly names, they only had heavenly names. When she actually then named them and said goodbye to them, that actually completed something that was missing, which I would not have been able to do, but what I did do prepared the way for that to take place. And something changed when they received an earthly name, and they were then free to pursue their eternal destiny. Now, I don't understand it all, but I know by personal experience something changed. I know by personal experience my daughter changed, in that everything that was weighed down on her in terms of the weight of the emotional baggage that she carried, because she had never dealt with the emotion of it, completely lifted off her. And so in both realms, something happened as a result of us connecting heaven with earth and seeing something change and transform. And it was a powerful thing, and I think if you think about those that have gone before us, they are still waiting for us to fulfill our part, so that they can be part of a generation that wins, if you like, rather than a generation that dies in faith, not having seen the fulfillment of the promises. So they are involved with that. They're actively involved in that as the cloud of witnesses. They are investing into us. And again, that freaks so many people out that we can engage in that way. And I mean, you're obviously aware of the situation with, a friend of ours. I'm not going to go into the name, but I mean, I received that information on Friday night, and I was really moved by it. I've never felt quite as moved by it, and I felt authorized to go and find out what was going on, and so I stepped into the court of the upright. I engaged the cloud of witnesses and asked some questions and got some answers, and again, that connection with what I saw related to something that had been seen, which brought a degree of heavenly revelation that brought earthly comfort. And I think that those are sort of things that we're going to engage with more and more, because it's not the end. It's just the beginning. Just like the whole circular thing, it's like the end is just the beginning of a new phase, if you like. a new phase of activity. You know, there is only one church, in a sense, and it's both heavenly and earthly, and it's connected. And we're not on our own in the task. We've got those that are engaging with us. And personally, for our ministry, we've engaged with 12 specific men in white linen, not all men, but they have been assigned to us as a reference for us to be able to engage them. Now, some people are engaging more than others, but the revelation that they've brought is really significant. And it was very interesting. I was talking to someone last night, and they'd been to a sort of large tent meeting, and where a number of our people went and ministered and lie busted people and got involved in ministry. And in one of the activities, the person who's associated with her in this Men in White Linen thing just gave her some direction and just encouraged her to go to this place. And she went and she engaged with someone who totally related to where she was, and she was able to speak into that person's life. You know, so this is more than just a, well, they're there cheering us on in heaven and applauding. Actually, it's an active involvement. And I think we're going to discover more and more of what that will be. But, you know, we can engage at that, you know. And I think Kristen said the week before we met about her experience of that with heaven open and looking into heaven in those scenarios. You know, we're just beginning more and more to experience these things. And, you know, there's so much more to come. You know, I think just scratching the surface of it, really. But I think the thing that I think annoyed Satan the most when he looked into the Firestones and saw man's role in what it was to bring government into the heavens, he thought was his domain. And, you know, it isn't just the earth. There's a fuller dimension to it than that. And I believe that so many of the angels and the angelic beings that God has created are created to serve him, but also created to serve us as his children, you know, those who inherit salvation. And a lot of what they're doing is because we've not yet matured to a place where we're doing it. And so some of the chancellors and the chancellor's court and some of the court activity, we are supposed to be judging in those courts. Now I know it says we will judge angels, and that's everyone accepts that, but they always think of that, well, that will be eventually sometime, you know, at the end. But the reality is Zechariah 3, 6 and 7 talks about a process of walking in his ways and then eventually having charge of his courts. And I think that having charge of his courts is a whole different dimension of exploration of things. And our role in it and our authority in it is going to increase as we mature. You know, the whole Galactic Council thing, and, you know, I've been and looked at that, and there are people there, very few of them are of this generation. Most of them are previous generation and ancient generation, and they're waiting for us to take our place. Because every generation should have those that serve the purpose of God in their generation, like David. You know, he served the purpose of God in his generation. Well, how do you serve the purpose of God? Well, you fulfill the fullness of government in our generation. And, you know, God is waiting, and those angelic beings are waiting for us to come to maturity. And then we get to actually adjudicate in the courts. And when someone comes with a scroll, they won't just be presenting it to angelic chancellors, they will be presenting it to us as chancellors who will officiate in those courts. You know, I'm on a little bit of a mission, starting to engage in those chancellors' houses and the different high chancellors, and I'm finding But as I talk to people, people are experiencing. They don't know where they are, but they're experiencing some of it. I talked to a lady, this was, I think, last week, and she was telling me that she'd been into this place and this happened and that happened, and she said, well, where is it? And it was in a treasury room, or a room, one of the chancellor's houses, and it's called the Affairs of the Nation. And she got to sit, and she had an interaction with someone else who was also sitting there, about the affairs of the nations. And at the moment, people have been asking me quite a lot recently, well, what should we be doing about all these things that go on in the world, and can we affect anything? And my usual answer is, well, if you're mandated to do something, then do it. If you're not, don't tackle it. You need to know that you're mandated in a nation, or you're part of that nation and have authority in it to deal with some of those things. But there are dimensions of things which I think we will get to begin to do, which are beyond our level of maturity right now, but is coming. And some people are getting forerunner experiences of it. And I had another lady I was talking to who, I think she described being around the Ark of the Presence of God, getting a mandate for God for a nation, and then beginning to administer that mandate, and she felt called to administer water. And she was on the mountain, she was administering water into this nation, and I think within a day there was this story in all the news that this huge lake had appeared in the desert in this nation. Like, it had just appeared. And so she said, do you think I had a part to play in it? And I'm like, I would accept that. Yeah, go for it. Because there may have been others that God was using, but she responded to the mandate, and she stepped out in faith, and she began to call forth that, and she saw it take place within a day or so. Which I think, well, okay, that's the stuff that I think we will get to do. Reshaping things. So yeah, I think the different ways in which we engage heaven will just totally challenge our preconceived ideas of what it's like. Because if you think that Jesus went into heaven and took his blood and put it on the heavenly tabernacle to cleanse it, it showed that it was uncleansed before he did that. Which again shows that heaven was not pure in that dimensional place because of the defilement that had taken place. So I'm
That's
sure
a good point.
I'm sure you'll have fun talking to your wife about it. I'm sure she'll probably hear a few more things that may well challenge some perspectives. But we've got to be willing to be teachable. I think it's that. Look, I don't know. When I think, okay, in the last year I've learned more than in 40 years. What's the next year going to be like? And I have to accept that there's no end to the increase of his government. Therefore, my part to play in that has to be an ever-increasing revelation of that government and what it means to occupy and outwork that government, which means things are definitely going to be challenged in our mindsets, without a doubt. I couldn't contain my previous mindsets and do what I'm doing right now. It would just, my soul would have been just blocking everything in the spirit. That's why I had to cleanse my gateways and deal with those belief systems. In my reason gate, I had to get rid of the religious belief systems that I had held. And that was no easy process, because I fiercely defended my position in certain things. But I had to surrender to allow God to renew my mind according to the new order of things and let go of the old. And people, and I say things that challenge people, not deliberately, but someone said to me the other day, it's like, you said something the other day which caused a whole lot of trouble. I said, oh, I'm really sorry, but I'm not really sorry, because we need to challenge each other. And it was like, you said you don't pray any longer.
Oh, I saw that.
So it was like, well, yeah, but I didn't mean I don't communicate with God. I just don't pray and I ask God to do things for me any longer, because he's given me the authority to do it myself, you know. And so it's just the whole language and the whole way that I would have seen things has just totally changed and transformed, you know. So okay. So is there any other questions anyone got? You're all really quiet.
That's unfortunate, Mike, that you have been religious. Some of us never suffered from that.
George, you're an anomaly.
Yeah.
Some of us were born perfect. I don't understand it. You know, that you're talking about the pattern there is the last hour worker, isn't it? In other words, you're talking about the multiplication, but that last hour worker caught the whole benefit, like we can do in this hour.
Absolutely, yeah, it's absolutely right. You know, and I personally experienced that. I went into Satan's trophy room. Wisdom directed me to go there. I went in there and I saw people's heritage. I saw my heritage that I had not received from previous generations, that which was intended for me to receive in a good sense. And I was incensed, in a sense, you know, that this had been robbed from me. And then God gave me the revelation that in this day we will get a restoration of everything that has been stolen and robbed from us from every previous generation that should have been passed into us in a good sense. Now I think that is pretty exciting. And even when I love reading books like God's Generals and things like that, where you see, hey, these men of God, they did awesome things. It's like everything that they did is going to be rolled into the mantles that are going to be released to this generation when we begin to operate as the Order of Melchizedek and the Joshua Generation. So that's a pretty exciting prospect. And in one sense, an almost difficult to imagine prospect, but I'm beginning to grasp that, you know, that we're going to get a whole load of things released to us in this generation to enable us to fulfill the task, and that's pretty exciting, you know. So yeah.
I had a dream some time ago. Of course, I know that's just the beginning. We talked about that last week, but we were breaking into this fortress like a team of SEALs, you know. We were breaking in and bombs blowing. We blew the wall down, went into this enclosure, and there was a big stack of money. And I wondered why I wasn't feeling like I was robbing the place. And then the Lord spoke to my spirit and said that this is your money you're reclaiming. And that's what you're referring to, is going in and reclaiming our inheritance.
Yeah, absolutely.
That's a good word.
Yeah. And also our heritage as well. I mean, our inheritance is something that belongs to us, but our heritage is something that we should have received from our previous generations having their inheritance. And it's like, you know, this thing about, you know, you should be preparing to pass on to your grandchildren. And in a sense, you know, we know that the enemy has caused iniquity to be passed from third to fourth generation. Well, what about the heritage that should be passed to third, fourth generation? And that, I think, is also going to be restored to us, which is, you know, I have not got a sort of a full grasp of what that means yet. I just, when I went there, I knew God imparted something in my spirit to what that is and what that will become, I think. So, yeah, pretty good. Any other things you want to throw out?
I've been working at a thought for a couple of years. Well, you know, you never know when they start, but on God's prayer bank. This is just preliminary and elementary, but how that prayer is eternal. And I'm referring to communication with God and the old thought of the kneeling Christian, you know, the image of the kneeling Christian. But when when prayer goes up into the eternals, it becomes eternal, and that prayer goes into God's prayer bank. I made that term up, referring to the vials that are poured out before the Father, the prayers of the saints. And those prayers can be used in any timeline, because in eternity there's no time. So we can go back and forward, or those prayers can go either direction. It's just the meditation on it is beginning to open up dimensions for me I've never had before.
Yeah, sure. And I think it goes beyond just our prayers doing it into us doing it, because that's the experiences I've had shared with me recently about people who God, when they've stepped into the realm of eternity, then God has taken them on the timeline, and then they've actually answered someone's prayer. And there's been 3 or 4 actual instances of people sharing that recently with me. One of them where 3 people together stepped into heaven together, and they all went back into the same time period, 1800 in Oklahoma. Went to a house, child was gravely ill, no one to minister healing. They ministered healing and stepped out of it back into the realm of heaven. They got to answer the prayer of those parents. Did they change time? No, they were always involved in that time. They just stepped into it from this point in eternity into it. And I think it's even expanding into how we can engage personally into it, rather than just our prayers, because when we learn to step into that realm, we become an answer to someone else's prayer, which is pretty exciting, that God can do that.
Would you think that they were actually visible to that family as they came to the cabin, or was it a spiritual experience where the child just got healed?
Oh, no, they were visible.
Mm-hmm.
I believe that this is where a lot of people think that they're angels turning up when they're actually people engaging. No, they were visible. They interacted with the family. And another occasion where I think it was someone basically said that they went back to Pearl Harbor, and stood in a gun emplacement where someone had run out of ammunition, turned around to them and basically cried out, they've run out of ammunition, and this lady opened her hands and out came magazines of bullets. Now I don't know whether that was to save that person's life, to save the person's life that they were defending with the gun in place. I have no idea, but she interacted and the person saw her. Now, I would be intrigued to see if I could ever find that person's testimony somewhere of how their life was saved by this angel who turned up with bullets out of thin air. I mean, but that, I think that's the sort of engagement that people are beginning to have. A friend of mine here, a couple of Sundays ago, I was doing an exercise, and I just opened the avenue for people to engage with God. He went off in the spirit to Russia, in his spirit, and actually ministered to, again, a family with a child in Russia. They interacted with him while he was just here. His body was here, but his spirit had actually engaged. That's just trans-relocation in one sense. I don't know what time he was in, whether it was now or whatever. He seemed to recognize the sort of the Russian high-rise blocks of flats and things that exist, so it may have just been in this time. But he was available, and God used him. And I think that's what I long for. When we come together and we come around the presence of God corporately gathering, we engaged around the throne of God, and we get assignments like that to go all over the world or in time, rather than, we're going to come and we're going to have our worship time, and then we'll have the Bible reading, and then someone will preach or whatever. actually, no, we're just going to step into the presence of God, around the throne of God, and we're going to get mandates for today. You know, and some of those mandates may be in the room to minister to each other, but actually there'll be mandates all over the world and in time. And wouldn't that be a great thing? Of when we come together, everyone has a mandate from God to minister in His kingdom. You know. Now, obviously, the more and more people that get brought into the kingdom, the less and less, I guess, that might be necessary, because there'll be more and more people available to go and minister those things in their nations or whatever. Maybe, I don't know. Maybe that's when we'll get to do more fun stuff in time. But you know, again, you know, a totally different way of seeing engagement in these things. You know,
I've been telling a story for years, some years, and I don't know where it came from, in reference to the supernatural and these things, about a man who would put on his good suit, go into the front room. Family would leave him alone because they knew he was going to go on a trip, and he would start pacing, and he would actually disappear. Come back days later, he had been in Russia somewhere, ministering somewhere. So, you know, those just in the vein of this, these things have been popping through for a long time, but we just haven't caught the concept or the understanding of it.
Well, I think that the problem is we see it as a special thing for certain people and not available for all of us. You know, it's like, well, God chooses to do that with some people, and I think a lot of that, and I think that's why, you know, there's this whole thing about, well, you can only do this stuff if God does it. You can't really try and initiate it, because that restricts us from stepping into the realm where God then can use us in those things.
Right.
And these things are available for all of us if we just learn to engage, you know, and there, I mean, it's exciting. I mean, when you think of it, I mean, you know, we get to be part of those stories that go around like that, and actually,
you know, I've stepped into a portal for years when I'm stepping into the ministry part. I mean, that's well exercised. As soon as I get out of my chair and step toward the pulpit, I go through a doorway. And, you know, that's been very visible to me for a long time.
Yeah.
But, you know, I'm being introduced, obviously, here to the fact that we can do that anywhere, any place, whenever we engage it.
Yeah.
I think, Mike, one thing that I've realized is that as long as you're, like you've said before, in a slave mentality or in a mode of I'm just here just to help God, and it's almost like we don't deserve anything.
Yeah.
These things are very, very because it's almost hard to believe that this is for us. But once I became really enlightenment and became a son, to where I just started to understand you love me, and it didn't matter what I did and how much I read my word or anything like that. It just mattered that I was his. Then all of a sudden this stuff became, oh, okay, yeah, this is my inheritance. And so it really is important to get people to realize, number one, that God's goal for them to be his sons.
Yeah, absolutely true. And I think I go into that quite a lot in the inheritance or destiny part of the stuff that I put out with the Alpha group, into the mindset of sonship and slavery mentality, of how we identify the slavery mentality and the poverty mentality and that whole thing. Because if the enemy can keep us in that slavery mentality, which, you know, they came out of Egypt, but Egypt didn't come out of them. You know, they still actually acted like they were still in Egypt, even though they had all the gold of Egypt and everything else. They still acted like that. They didn't come up the mountain. They sent Moses. You know, they kept that mindset, and they went round in the wilderness because of that mindset, because they didn't believe that what God said was theirs, their whole land. You know, only 2 people said, yeah, this belongs to us, let's go. The other 10, no, we're grasshoppers. You know, when they were giant slayers, you know, if they'd said, no, we're giant slayers, hey, this is a great opportunity to get rid of these giants once and for all, the whole generation could have gone in. And so understanding that, you know, that we're not to be walking around the wilderness anymore because we have an inheritance as sons is absolutely vital. It is. And that mindset and challenging that mindset and seeing that mindset broken in us is a big part for being able to embrace a lot of the things that God is saying, just like you're saying. You know, it's a major key in this whole pattern. You know, sons inherit, slaves just serve. You know, and there is this process, you know, of slavery to bond slavery to stewardship to friendship. And I think once we get to the friendship, then lordship, kingship, and into the fullness of sonship. Once we're friends, we realize that we're sons. I think the intimacy of sonship comes out in that intimate experience in this journey that we're on. You know, and as long as we're willing to keep on the journey, there's ever increasing revelation of what sonship is. You know, because we're a son, whether we're a baby or whether we're a teenager or whether we're in our 20s or 30s, we're still a son. But there are different roles that sons play in different levels of maturity, and we've got to keep maturing and not just, you know, the danger is people can have an experience of sonship that they just want to stay in the experience of, wow, isn't this lovely, I'm a son of God, not realizing that sons have responsibility for rulership. And you know, and I think there are so many people, it's almost like they're hopping on one foot because they've just stayed in the intimacy message and not got 2 feet on the ground with the responsibility message. You know, and you can't move forward very far by hopping. You know, but once you got 2 feet, you can walk. And I think God wants us to walk into, you know, sonship and walk into our inheritance through intimacy, but through into responsibility. And you know, that's the journey we're on, which is pretty good. Anyway.
In connection, Mike, with that illustration, could we go this far? My sons, you know, started out with I helped them across the street.
Yeah.
And as they matured, we played together. Now at 40, my son dominates me and he usually leads in most of our encounters because he's got not only the strength, but he's got wisdom, he's got talents I don't have. Now, could we extrapolate that with God, not diminishing God, but the fact that we're to take more of a dominant role in our activities?
Oh, absolutely, yeah. I mean that is what the maturity brings. We're no longer, God is no longer changing our nappies. He's no longer feeding us all the time. He is equipping us to do that for ourselves. And in a sense, you know, this is where the different dimensions of praying come in. I'm no longer asking God to do something for me. I step into the place of authority to administer what his purpose is for me myself. So, you know, I don't ever ask God to do anything other than, you know, the basic things of, you know, more intimacy and I want to know you better and those type of things. But when it comes to government, you know, we're growing to a level that our words will become creative, where we will begin to release creativity as a son in the image of Jesus. Now, that has huge implications for what we will be doing in the future, you know, and you know that, I mean, it's fun to think about some of those things. I spend some time thinking about what will I be doing, you know, in eternity, if you like. But we have to practice, and Jesus said there will be rewards for our faithfulness here with what we've been given in the future. And I think we need to make sure that we're operating in that maturity here so that we will then be able to operate in that maturity there. So definitely so, and I think that's really what government is. It's about expressing who we are as God's children and sons, and it is difficult for some people to get their head around that completely, because they have that mindset of, well, how could I possibly do that because I'm just a worm? No, you're a son of God, created in God's image, and that is ultimately, what God's desire is, that we would be represented on the earth as those sons. It's like to become manifested sons. I mean, that's what I'm sort of, looking for, the manifestation of sonship on earth as it is in heaven, so that we can actually do those greater works. Because that's what sons will do. Slaves will never do it. Stewards will never do it. But sons will, and so it's an exciting opportunity to step into that. Yeah. Okay.
Amen.
Okay.
What's God going to do with all the dumb Christians that end up in heaven?
Well, I'm hoping there'll be a lot less dumb Christians as we begin to demonstrate what the kingdom is.
Is there going to be an education center there?
Well, unfortunately, there is an inner court and an outer court. There are places where there are, less fulfillment of destiny. Unfortunately, our life here is critical to what we will be doing. I think Jesus made that really clear. And therefore it's really, really important that we come into sonship here, so that we will have the fullness of sonship in eternity. Now, it's an interesting subject. I haven't got time to go into it now, but the key is, let's make sure that we're outworking who we are and growing and maturing in sonship here, because then
that puts a whole new thought on a phrase my friend used years ago. This is eternity's dressing room.
Absolutely, yeah. I think that's absolutely true. It is. And I think if Christians really got hold of that, they would change their whole mindset in terms of what they're doing with redeeming the time and making sure that what they're doing now is using the gifts and calls and destiny that God's given, rather than squandering it or wasting it, on our own stuff. But God isn't. He is continuing to call people, and even up to the last minute, those people that embrace this at the last minute will get the same wages as those that are embracing it now. And that's because that's the grace and wonder of God and His mercy. But we want to see those people accept that and respond and come into it, which is part of what I think God is raising up this generation to do, is to be a demonstration that will say to others, this is the light, this is our inheritance. We don't have to go around like we did waiting to be rescued. We are going to win. We are called to be more than conquerors, to actually be without spot and wrinkle and blemish when Jesus returns, so that we're ready for that. Not, oh well, please come and rescue us, which He's not going to do, because He's coming when we've done the job of seeing the restoration of all things spoken to of the prophets and of old. So that's a good place to finish, I think.